Mr. Chair, whenever you are settled and ready, I don't think we're going to. This just in. I'll make it easy for you.
Okay, great. All right. I'd like to call the Los Osos Groundwater Basin Management Committee to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Take a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Ohilsky is absent today. The minutes reflect. Director Cody.
Here.
And Chairperson Zimmer.
Here.
Wonderful. We do have a quorum.
Good. Okay, I'd like to move to item 4. Any board member comments? None from me.
Okay.
Charlie? All right, we'll move to item 5, the consent agenda. On the consent agenda, we have A and B, approval of the minutes, and approval of the warrants, budget update, and invoice registry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only comment was to thank Matt Velez, who's back there, who has been preparing the minutes for us, and this will be the last set of Velez minutes. So if you've liked the minutes, you can thank Matthew on your way out.
All right.
We look forward to the next.
Done a very good job, Matt. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's all staff has. I do think we need public comment on this item before we take action.
Okay, I'll open it up to public comment.
Is this public comment in general?
No, we have that at the end. Minutes and budget warrants.
I want to have a brief comment on 7A.
Okay, when we get there. Yeah, okay. Okay, no public comments. Any board comments? Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Yeah, I'd like to pull 7A from the consent agenda just for a brief comment, if we could.
Do you mean 5A?
Or 5A, I'm sorry.
5A.
Oh,
Sure.
5A, right, sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
Or just for comment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's regarding the Cuesta monitoring well. I had a little discussion with the CSD this week about that. S&T would prefer that these joint BMC assets, the capital assets, would be owned in common with the 3 water purveyors, and it's very inefficient to do that at this point with that monitoring well. So we certainly don't want to hold this up. So we're going to approve the warrants and budgets. I guess it's B that I'm commenting on, actually.
Got it.
And so other than that, I just wanted to make that comment about that. So in general, we're in favor of forming a JPA.
Okay.
Okay. All right, no other comments. We have a motion and second?
Yes, I'll second that.
All right. Now move to item 6.
Let's go ahead and maybe do a quick voice vote, if you like, on this. Sure. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Great. Item 6, Executive Director's Report. You may have noticed there's a lot in this report this time. And so quite a few things to chew on. Again, these are for items that are not on the agenda, and we try to provide a general status update. And your new Executive Director, Dan Heimel, who's in the audience with us today, helped me prepare this particular Executive Director's report. So I'll just run through a few items verbally for the audience to hear. We have a section that discusses funding, and I think the one item that's probably of particular interest is Dan had brought up the recent funding increase, the funding availability increase for planning studies, recycled water planning studies. that you can now get up to $150,000 with appropriate matching funds. And we pointed out some ideas where that money could be pursued, because you've already invested quite a bit of money that could be used as potential match against these planning study funds. And one is, now that the amount is higher, we could consider funding things like a transient groundwater model, continued soil aquifer analysis for the creek discharge, or any other recycled water use scenarios that we want to look at. So just one more funding source, and it tends to be not so competitive as the other sources. So something to keep in mind as you head into 2020, now that they've raised that amount. We talked quite a bit in the report about the status of staff-to-staff discussions for funding those portions of the Basin Infrastructure Program that aren't yet really defined in terms of how they'll be funded, nor their schedule. And we gave you a status update of those staff-level discussions, which have gotten quite detailed and are ongoing. With respect to the potential for a joint powers formation, going to Director Cody's comment, we did give you just staff's first blush at some pros and cons for that particular discussion. And ultimately, if you do want to share assets in common, a simple JPA would be required to do that, though there is some complexity and costs that come along with that decision, and we just gave you a brief food for thought there. We talked a little bit about Program B implementation and funding. I can go into this a little bit more when we talk about infrastructure for Program B. But we did identify some key steps, and we're fleshing those out at the staff level before we bring them before you in detail. And so you're going to hear more about that. And then we did give a land use planning update, which in previous years we really haven't done, but there's so much going on right now that we think we want to continue this on into the near-term future. So some of you know that there's a community plan, a Los Osos community plan update that's now available online with the county. And there's an EIR that goes along with that, with comments that are due here shortly. Actually, they were due last week. Let me make sure I've got that right. Yeah, December 11th. So the comment period's closed on that, but all that documentation is available online. There's also a habitat conservation plan published. So a lot of information out there on the community plan update. And there'll be public hearings coming up here in front of County Planning Commission first, then the Board of Supervisors. So that's one of the most important planning documents for this community that has been prepared in many years. So do stay engaged in that. We did have a little bit of information on the accessory dwelling unit, or ADU, issue. It's our understanding, I may not have this perfect, Director Gibson can correct me if I'm inaccurate, but we believe there will be a discussion at the Board of Supervisors level on January 28th to discuss the ADU issue specific to Los Osos, specifically to potentially delay the blanket allowance of ADUs until the water issue has been addressed. So that's an important public hearing coming up in January. Moving on to the Los Osos wastewater project, we provided a flow and connection update. Sea Pines Golf Course has received quite a lot of effluent from the project, and with most of the balance going to Broderson. And we have virtually all of the properties are connected. We have about 47 that remain unconnected, so the numbers continue to improve month by month. There were a few water conservation rebates given in the last reporting period, a number of toilets, some washing machines, and one hot water recirculator. And then we have given you an update on cannabis and hemp, because there is some activity in the basin. Now, there is some activity also outside of the basin, but on Los Osos Valley Road. And so we're not specifically reporting on that. But if it was in the basin and we found out about it, we reported on it. And we gave you two assessors' parcel numbers there and the county tracking numbers for a use permit for cannabis, just so folks can be aware. and then provided you an update on the various ongoing tasks that may not appear on the agenda today. We did complete the adaptive management memo on nitrate contamination, and that's item 7C today. So I'll give a brief presentation for the board and the public here later. We've completed our recruitment process for a new executive director. Thank you, Mr. Heimel. And haven't had a lot of activity on the seawater intrusion imaging process with Cal Poly. I know there were some land-based challenges there. Staff did get a proposal for an 8th and Elmore urban stormwater recovery project. We're reviewing that and discussing that before we bring that forward. That will come back to you in January. And then creek discharge, the next steps on that project are on your agenda on another item today, 7B. We have the typical Sustainable Groundwater Management Act update, and no real groundbreaking activities there other than to say that the Los Osos area subbasin is still listed as very low priority under the new SGMA guidelines. And I believe that covered my entire Executive Director's report. Yes, and I'm happy to answer questions before we go to public comment.
Okay, I'd like to bring it back to the board for any questions.
Go ahead, Charlie. I'll follow you.
Okay, I have several questions. You mentioned, Rob, in here about staff meetings, and I don't know if the water purveyors are welcome to provide staff to come to these meetings.
They are, since you're director and staff, to avoid directors.
That can be repaired.
If to the extent that you had a staff level person you wanted to designate, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. And then, let's see. As far as the new cannabis, the applications for change in use for the cannabis, the ag situations, I'm wondering if part of the charter of the Basin Management Committee is to try to improve measurements and monitoring in the basin. It's one of our core charges here. And I wonder if it would be possible or for the Basin Management Committee to make a recommendation to the county that when there's a big change in use, ag use like this, that they also require metering for that ag well that would be used.
Yeah, I think if I could jump in on that, depending on the situation, we often do, and particularly if I may have missed it, but the particular permit for cannabis cultivation is over the adjudicated part of the basin or outside the adjudicated part?
It's within the basin.
It's within our part of the world. So we would see that as a basin in critical overdraft, level of severity 3 in our resource management system. And so they would need to do water offsets, and to confirm the water offsets, they have to meter their water use. That's typical requirement in the land use permit for that.
Very good, Bruce. And so then those measurements, those production numbers then would be available to our staff for.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Public record on that. So.
Let's see. I think I have another one here, but nope. That's all I've got. That's all the questions and comments I have.
Excellent,
Charlie.
Thank you.
So that was a good question on water use there. I'm interested in the recycled water facilities grant program. Especially as you reference, I think the committee knows my interest in having a transient model instead of our trusty old stolid state model would get us into the 21st century, and I think it'd be useful in assessing things. For instance, like the nitrate issues that we're dealing with. I think that kind of transient model would give us a little clearer insight as to the timeline on which things are going to change if we do certain do certain things. I guess our staff looked at it, and Kate can comment further. But our public works staff noted that they will pay up to half of project costs, up to half of project costs, up to now $150,000 of output from them.
Right.
And so we've got to figure out a way to fund the other half, one way or another. And off the top of my head, I forget the timing on which we lay out budget and work plan. But I think given this new source, it may be useful to fold that into our thinking on when we update our next work plan as to whether that might be a possible step we should take.
We do have a agenda item even today for a draft work plan, and then we usually end up adopting that in January. So we give you an early preview just for discussion, a month to have staff level discussions, and we bring it back in January. So now is a good time to add things like that and try to frame up a project that takes as much advantage of the dollars we've already spent and committed as match to limit our exposure there. So, yeah, and I'll be talking a little bit more about transient model when we talk about the nitrate system, because I probably haven't seen a memo that made me want a transient model more than that one.
Right.
So that was definitely check that box. Yeah.
Do you know just approximately what that would cost for Los Osos?
We do. Probably around $120,000 to $150,000.
So we would be looking at 60 in grant and
let's call it 75,000 to find out.
And then we would be on the hook for the other 75. Is that?
Or if it's a combined recycled water program, including creek discharge, we already have committed 50,000. So we might be able to frame the overall application to take advantage of the dollars we've invested already or are about to invest.
So, again, our staff, and I don't know, Kate, if you have any further insights into it, but it would be interesting to know what the requirements are at the state level, what kinds of projects can qualify, but I think we should push the envelope broadly on all of that.
Well said.
I think that's
good.
Important.
So it spurred another question you just mentioned about an additional $50,000 for the creek discharge?
We haven't spent the $50,000 that you've already committed. The consultant hasn't finished the work product yet. So, we would.
But we're looking at that product today, though, right?
You're looking at authorizing the next phase of it. You've authorized $5,000 at your last meeting to work out all logistical items. That's another item on your agenda that we'll go through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That was a good question. There might also be a typo on the bold print there with the acronym WRFP. Should it be RWFPS?
Where are you at there?
I'm on page 1 of your executive report. Down at the bottom where it talks about the grant funding for the RWFPS. But the bold print.
Water Resources Facilities Planning? Water Recycling Facilities Planning Grant?
Okay.
Planning. Oh, it might be.
I was just looking at the second time you wrote the acronym. It's
gotcha.
different, so just a clerical.
Civil engineers can come up with acronyms on the fly faster than...
All right. I have another question regarding the basin plan and implementation and funding. There's 4 bullet items, and bullet 2 talks about funding and execution plan of the basin infrastructure programs B and D. And should that be B and U, or because D is talking, well, I guess we've added U to it, so that's the part that gave me a little bit of uncertainty about what between D and U. And I see in the original basin plan we do have D, which are the expansion wells.
Right.
Right. But then we also have U, which is our creek discharge and stormwater recovery project. So maybe we need to add U to that then? Or?
Yeah, so that second bullet was intended to reflect back to the published basin plan.
Okay.
Programs B and D. And the third bullet mentions the creek discharge project. But no, I agree in the future, since we've kind of formalized that into Program U, I think it'd be just fine to add that to that bullet.
Right.
No, that's good.
And then on the note below that one, it talks about that funding already exists for programs A and C. And I don't know if, once again, I was just looking at the programs listed in this our report here, but C is lumped together with, I believe, D. So in the chart, I believe we left out the heading of D there. It just got a little confusing when I was cross-referencing the two. So page 3 of
well, when we hit item
7A.
7A there, we'll talk about expansion well number 2 under program C.
Right, but then under that heading of program C, we also list the 3 items that we're referring to as D, I believe, which are the expansion wells.
Those are still program C expansion wells. There's an additional 3 wells contemplated in program D. But if with your permission, I'll sort of expand on that during that item.
Okay.
Make myself a note here.
All right, thank you.
And if I could, just following on the question of the different programs, we had the staff conversations that have been going on, or we're looking at trying to lay out what each of the members of this committee has spent in terms of resources implementing programs to date. And I was just curious, I know we've had, you said 3 meetings on that, and with more contemplated. How far are we from getting an outline of where we are?
Quite far. In fact, some of the budget allocations we're asking you to make for next year sprung from some of those discussions. So we wanted to have clear enough understanding of the next steps at the staff level in order to feel comfortable vetting it in public without confusing folks. So we're almost there.
So looking at the past, so you're saying the analysis of the past.
Oh, we've got that, and those figures are reported in item 7A.
We're up to date on that.
We
so
are.
Okay, because we had not been completely clear on that.
Right. We do have those. We do have those numbers nailed down as to what's been spent.
And they're listed in the chart
they are.
Today.
Yeah.
So we have those numbers. But I think what we're looking at now is the future.
Yeah.
That's what that note talking about, that program C, all of those projects under program C, it kind of implies that there funding exists for those, and I think that there's some that we are still contemplating funding in, or some of the projects may be deferred.
Right.
So,
yeah, we'll talk about it under 7A.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then just one more, going down to the JPA formation. I appreciate the pros and the cons helped out.
One perspective.
Perspective, yeah. But I'd start reflecting on what are these projects. So one of the what I consider to be a significant pro is that we'll have joint ownership of facilities. But what are those facilities going to actually be? Is it really going to be worth the complexity that we're going to impose by forming a JPA, and will there be significant financial contributions from the JPA? Will we be more eligible for grant funding or some other funding source that we wouldn't without forming a JPA? But what are these facilities actually going to be? Today what we have in front of us really is the creek discharge and the collection system, right, for the drainage.
Right. I mean, it's clear that a public agency, either the district or the county, can own and pursue any of those projects with support from the other group members. Mm-hmm. Certainly that's possible. We've done it here with the Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well. But if we were going to implement, say, a regional nitrate removal facility under Program B as in boy, that would be one facility that, if it's to be shared, could either be owned by a public agency, and then there's agreements with everybody who uses and benefits from that facility, or the JPA could own it outright, and all the members of the JPA then have true, joint ownership of that facility. So
Yeah, so I'm just not sure what facilities we would actually have that we're looking at in front of us. And there may be some that are coming down the road, but it just kind of gets to my position. It may be a little early to form that JPA.
Right.
At this point. I don't know why we'd want to jump into that complexity unless we really had something on the table that we were making that kind of decision on.
Yeah, I think next year you're going to see, we're putting together defined plans for implementing Program B. What would it look like? How would it be funded? And some point in that process, we're going to need to know how ownership is going to be contemplated for that infrastructure item.
Well, and also ongoing operations of this. If we come up with different management activities that we're going to have to pursue, even the annual plan, making sure that the costs of management are equitably assessed through the basin and efficiently assessed through the basin. A JPA may have some benefits there in terms of being able to secure the necessary funding for both projects and the ongoing work that we're just going to need to do to keep on top of all this.
Yeah, and I guess that was what one of my questions was, how would we benefit from that funding? How would that funding be structured?
Well, I think that's the very next question. It's coming up in subsequent agenda items, but that was my interest in making sure we understood the past, was then moving forward as we have projects to do. That's where we figured that out.
Okay.
One of the things, if I could just, in my experience from forming fire protection authorities from special districts, for instance, one of the advantages is that the resulting fire authority can have an operating fund, and they're not bound by the same rigor, perhaps, a different rigor for budgeting and so on of those funds that would be separate from the basin. Each individual purveyor or member of the basin management committee, and it might be a simpler way to implement funding and things like that.
This can be going on for a long time.
Yeah. No, I understand that. It's just, how are we going to acquire those funds? How are we going to impose those funds? Is that JPA would have the authority to do that throughout the community? Is that how that would be structured?
Perhaps, or even for just asking for budgeted monies from the four members of the.
That's a way.
Okay.
Yeah. We talked about
basin committee.
We talked about assessments, so we equitably, fairly assess the entire basin, not just the prohibition zone, for instance, for the cost of water recycling. And we have counsel here who. We don't draw on enough of her expertise, so we could ask her to comment if she thought there was something.
Well, I don't think so at this time. I think those are just some of my questions that I'll have to dive into deeper. Right. But just on initial, there is that complexity there that we'll have to go down a path and ensure. But those were two of my primary thoughts. Is what when I'm just looking at this small list of pros, what are those assets that we're going to jointly own? And then what is the funding process and mechanism? How will that come into play with the JPA?
We appreciate that feedback. Thank you. We'd love to hear public comment on this one, too.
All right.
When you're ready. Easy to forget.
Okay, I think that's it for my comments on the executive report. Thank you, Rob.
Perfect. Thanks.
Open it up to public comment.
Good afternoon, Lindy Owen. A couple thoughts about the recycled water, and I don't know if there's been much brought up. I know that we've talked about it on the CSD level about the, I'll call it a faucet, for the purple pipe that's on 10th Street. It was set in, and is that going to be discussed in the near future, or is that more between the county and the CSD, or just the idea of who would be able to get that water? How would a program be set up so that it could be used for, in my case, we're interested in watering trees that get planted and that are dying with lack of water. So that's one question I was hoping that there'll be some discussion on. I'd like to know, where's where's this water credit program going at this point? To me, it looks like most of Los Osos has been retrofitted for a majority of things. You have just a dribble of things that came in. It's hardly anything over the last couple months. So it has a lot to do with new growth and what kind of water, paper water, we're talking about for this new growth program, especially with everything coming open now with the community plan and the HCP. Cannabis and hemp. Are you including the gigantic hemp farm that is next to the sewer? That is in our basin. Do you know how much water they're using? Did we ever figure out whether they were going to be driving around to people's water softeners and picking up water so that they could get the credits that were supposed to have been issued before they got to start growing? Visually, it's huge, and I think there's some information about how much they are using. So I really think that's important that we see that new ag use. That was not unnecessarily currently used agricultural land, so that's a new use, and that's the kind of stuff we need to be watching out for. And the sub-basin, again, they don't even have a basin management plan, yet they've allowed a number of hemp activities in there, so on previously unfarmed areas. So cannabis is a little bit like wine. It messed up the Paso Basin because nobody was watching, and so I want to keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick McGibney, Baywood Park. I actually just want to get a point of order going on here because I'm not really understanding the agenda here. So is there an item or for public comment for action items also?
Yeah, we're going to definitely take public. Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, but I'll just answer your point of order and go out of my order.
Thank you.
Order. We are going to have public comment after each action item, 7A, B,
Okay.
C, and D. So each one you'll have an opportunity.
It wasn't listed on here. Okay. And I just want to thank actually Rob and the committee for doing such a great job on working with the basin and trying to save our community water.
Lou Tornatsky. I thought I was coming to a meeting where you're actually going to talk about content. And you skip through in 8 or 9 minutes headings. And then let's quit. And you guys talk. I've never seen anything. I would have liked to have seen something because I can read 50 pages of technical stuff and I'll be up here and commenting on half of them. I don't know what you want. Sorry.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Jeff Edwards, and Rob, I'd like to thank you for the excellent content and breadth of discussion in your ED report. I think it's come a long way from the first one. It's hard to believe that this is almost to the day, the 4-year anniversary of this committee meeting. To the contents of the report, the first thing I'd like to discuss a little bit is the JPA, and I appreciate the pro and con start that has been generated, but this is a complex matter and requires a full discussion. Frankly, I'm dubious about the need for it. Certainly, we don't want to form a JPA simply to own assets. I think there are other ways around that. Golden State is working on that right now. Their lawyers are. So I think that may be something we want to very carefully consider, if at all. With regard to Program B, Program B is very high in operation and maintenance costs. That's clear. The CSD and Golden State already have facilities of this nature. They're really, I view them as almost experimental, and still would like to see a fairly long-term track record relative to their production and operational costs. A quick note about the Los Osos Community Plan. The comment period did close December 11th. I provided a fairly detailed comment letter, much of which discusses water and the water balance of our basin. So I'll email that to your executive director, and perhaps he can distribute that. But there are a couple things in the community plan that I wanted to make note of. One is the resource management system, and that comes up for consideration. The board takes that up every May, June. So in May or June of next year, I think it'll be taken up, or maybe 2021. In any event, the water supply and water system are part of that. And I think right now our supply is level 3 severity, and I think really it's backwards. I think our supply is level 2, quite likely, and really it's our system, our management that we need to improve. So I would just make that note. And then on the last comment on the community plan is that I believe the community plan contemplates elimination of Title 19 retrofit. And in my comments, I've suggested that be retained. In fact, we need to go to a 3.0 Title 19, really. And as to whether or not there are retrofit opportunities in this town, I will tell you, and your own executive director provided analysis on this conservation potential. It's enormous. It's anywhere from 150 to 250 acre-feet per year. So this community has not been retrofitted. The accessory dwelling unit ordinance that's coming up the board agenda on the 28th of January, we can retrofit. This doesn't raise any special condition 6 issues on the CDP for the wastewater project. This is just like adding a bedroom or bathroom. Bedrooms typically drive the use. So I think with regard to ADUs, we simply need to make them retrofit at the 2-to-1 ratio. It's as simple as that. Sea Pines is continuing to get a lot of wastewater. We only have about 525 acre-feet per year. That's it. And Sea Pines is contracted for 50 acre-feet per year. That's 10%. It's not as bad as providing water to dryland farmers, but it's pretty close. And I think that we really need to monitor what kind of flows they're getting. And I would encourage everyone, if they haven't read the draft hemp ordinance, comment period closed today, but that debate will be taking place next year. And I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Barry Brannon, property owner in the Los Osos Basin. The item of a representative in the joint power agreement came to our position. As farmers, there are no ag representatives in this group, yet my property is in the basin. And there's no representation. I'm in the sub-basin. I'm also in the Warden Creek sub-basin. So we ag farmers have no voice as far as pending action. Discharge in Los Osos Creek, that's adjacent to my property. The Warden Creek runs through my property. So if you're going to have a JPA and you're going to allow a director to be on it from it without having a mutual water entity, we haven't formed an ag water group, but we're if that's necessary, we'll do it. But we'd like to have some representation on this authority because there's a lot of farm property out there that's being farmed, and we don't want our water threatened without having some representation. So in your staff meeting, it would be nice if we had some, at least comments from that direction. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other public comment, bring it back to Rob.
Yeah, just a couple of quick follow-up items for Lindy. I haven't heard a lot about the 10th Street fill station, recycled water fill station. I know county staff was looking to get Sea Pines up and running, then focus on the middle school, and it still, I believe, remains on their list as a project, but I don't think there's current motion on it for this short-term period.
I've asked about it and haven't heard back from staff
Okay.
Exactly the status of it. there does remain the question of who is appropriately trained to actually be able to use that turnout according to state statute, and so we got to figure out how that's going to work. But I think you're right. There are other recycled water issues that are up ahead in the queue.
And I think there's a slate of initiatives and efforts that are going to be proceeding forward. As to the retrofit projects, certainly those retrofits are available. There's been some public outreach, and we do know there's a lot of 1.6 gallon toilets out there. They're starting to get old, and so toilets alone, I think, can really benefit from the high efficiency toilets, as well as a number of other fixtures. There's still a lot to be saved out there. We did attempt to identify the hemp project, though those aren't regulated in the same way that cannabis is. So the information that we have is maybe less than we have for the cannabis proposal. We certainly listed what we know, and we're always happy if so directed by the committee to bring back a full item on cannabis and hemp if you want to have a more detailed discussion, which goes a little bit to Lou Tornatsky's comment. Now, this executive director's report for the public is just a general update on items that have not received a specific agenda item. So it kind of hops around to different items. You will see a little more content into each of the other items, 7A through 7D, if you hang with us here a little bit. And also, just for folks who may just have received an agenda, if you want the full package, go to slowcountywater.org, and in the lower right-hand corner, just click on Los Osos Basin Management Committee. And I always upload the full agenda package so you have an opportunity to read the reports that are going to be talked about at the meeting. So you can get that through the website. And some good comments from Jeff and Barry, but no specific responses there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring it back to the board.
I just want to comment. I've done a little arithmetic here on the recycled water being used by sea pines, and the total effluent output flow for the recycled water is about 500,000 gallons per day, as you report in your report. With a little bit of arithmetic, you can see that the biggest use that sea pines has had in a month represents 0.08 million gallons a day, which is only 17% of that production of recycled water. So I'm a little confused by statements. I don't think that this is a majority of that water, unless my arithmetic.
Yeah, no, not a majority. It's a significant volume, and it is something that, as you look at the competing priorities for recycled water, it's something that the committee does have to keep in mind, that if you're not fully utilizing, say, the Broderson percolation site, or if you implemented creek discharge but don't have enough water to give to it, you really are going to reach a point where you're having to make those kinds of hard judgment calls. Because even if it's only 40, 50 acre feet per year, that's a significant fraction of basin water resources. So I think that was the nature of the comment.
And right now there are only 2 outfalls online, right? It's just Broderson and Sea Pines, if I understand.
And Bay Ridge is the other one.
Oh, and Bay Ridge, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So if I could, just following on the question of hemp and cannabis, any irrigated agriculture over a level of severity 3 basin does require ag offsets, whether it's cannabis or whether it's some other crop. We'll double check on the exact boundaries of where that is, but cannabis or hemp should be offsetting over this part of the basin, certainly, if that's what it is. Okay. And secondly, to Mr. Bannon's question about representation, I am your representative on this. As the county represents, I'm here representing all the area that's not specifically covered by a water purveyor, and the wider sense of the unincorporated area here as regards especially land use. So certainly happy to meet with any agriculturalists who are interested to understand your issues, but that's why I'm here.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to action items 7, beginning with 7A.
Yeah, 7A is a status update that we always provide on infrastructure, and it's intended really to give a snapshot on the status of each project, and I'll go through those in some detail here. Our first project is under Program A, and to remind folks, Program A is focused on building some upper aquifer resources, often to blend with lower aquifer resources, and much of that has been completed. In fact, there's only one remaining project under Program A, and that's the Los Osos CSD's upper aquifer well at 8th Street. That well has been drilled and cased and is ready to be equipped. It's been designed and is ready to go out to bid. We're just waiting for the IRWM matching funds to finally become available, and the state keeps pushing that deadline out. The latest update is that they should be available in the second quarter of 2020, and we're carefully tracking that and providing information in support of the county's overall IRWM. But it does appear highly likely that we'll be successful at getting about $250,000 of funding. So it's a large enough amount that we've been waiting on that. The rest of the balance of Program A has been funded and completed. And you'll see there that there is a restatement of the capital cost. For instance, that Golden State has invested in that program a little over $1 million in their completed Program A project. Program B has a funding status which is not funded, and you'd see some of the capital estimates associated with those programs. So that's the source of some of those staff level discussions. Are we going to fund Program B? When will that be funded, and what are the steps there? So that's something to watch for in the future. As to the community nitrate removal facility, we have reported that Golden State has partially implemented that, which is similar to Program B, but also Program A. And they've spent about $1.2 million on the nitrate removal facility that's currently operating. You heard one of the speakers refer to it. So you do have maybe 2 years of operating data on that, and it's I think it's performing well from what I've heard, and certainly getting a better handle on what the cost per acre foot is, and it is significant. It's much more expensive than just pumping it out of the ground, perhaps $1,000 an acre foot. And then a discussion of Program C, and there was some, I think, helpful clarification. So just so it's clear, because I know Program C has gotten a lot of community interest in the past. Program C was the construction of 3 wells that are in our deep aquifer, and they were all intended to be west of Los Osos Creek. So 3 wells west of the creek, and some water mains to connect those wells. And that was Program C. So all that you see here listed under Program C focuses on those 3 wells. None of this refers to Program D, which it would be wells 4, 5, and 6, I guess you could say, right, on the east side of the creek, further to the east. So these 3 wells, one has been completed by Golden State, and one is being pursued by Los Osos Community Services District. It is funded. How it ultimately is implemented and owned, we'll see how that goes, because I know at least one director here, Charlie, has expressed a lot of interest in some participation in that well as a backup source of supply. So we've been waiting to get a test well installed at the Los Osos Middle School, and agreements with the school have been executed. It went out to bid and has been awarded. Filipponi and Thompson will be drilling that in the coming few weeks, maybe even by your next meeting. I don't know if you'll have data yet, but certainly the drilling will be underway, if not complete. We'll drill a test hole, get all of our data, and destroy that hole. It's a temporary well, and then we'll report back on that data. So it could either be, looks like it's a viable place to develop a water supply well, or it's not. So we'll be able to report out on that under Program C. And the third well under Program C, we reviewed an adaptive management memo last year that focused on that well, and we're currently looking to defer it at this point. And I see the confusion there in the table, and we'll make that more clear in the next program. Under Program M, the Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well, which some people call the Lupin monitoring well because it's on Lupin, has been completed. We have some initial monitoring data that we're going to provide under Agenda Item 7C. No big surprises, and we'll report out on that. We can now monitor not only Zone D, but this is also a deep zone, Zone E, monitoring well at Cuesta by the Sea. So it fills in a critical data gap. It's not sensitive to pumping and other transient effects, so it's going to be a key monitoring point for us. And then you've got an update on the creek discharge program. And we wanted to make it clear, it was a comment last time, that let's be clear what the total cost is and where we're at. So we've added some notation there. And we're working on a $50,000 consultant budget to look at soil aquifer treatment, and that work is ongoing. In fact, it's on your agenda today. And then, again, for 8th and El Moro urban stormwater recovery, we have a consultant proposal, a draft, and that will be coming back for committee action at a future date. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board?
I just have a comment that S&T and Golden State Water are in active discussions about interties for that Program C intertie that's on the list. So there's been some motion there.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. Open it up for public comment on item 7A.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Edwards. I just have a couple quick questions with regard to expansion well number 2. Rob, what is the anticipated depth of that well when it's completed? And secondly, what is your expected yield from that well, a range perhaps? And then in that zone, Napomo, Freeman Lane, Willow Road, Andre, and so forth, the folks that have wells over there, if you know, what depths are their wells at? Thanks.
Okay, seeing no further public comment, we'll bring it back to Rob.
I absolutely have that information. Whether I have it right in the top of my head, I'm not sure that I've got it all nailed. I could certainly get back to Jeff on that. The depth of the well would be to penetrate down into the lower aquifer, into Zone D. And because it varies by terrain, I would venture it'd be in the 400 to 500 foot range. But I know it gets shallower there at that particular location, so it could be on the shallower side of that. And well depths, we have a pretty good technical report on estimated depths for wells in that area, which I don't have in front of me. But we are hoping for a yield on the order of 100 to 200 acre foot per year. So not as large as some of the yields of the main wells we have in the western side of the basin, who can produce 400 or 500 gallons a minute. This would be more like 100 to 200 gallons per minute is kind of what we would target as a production level. And hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. Thank you.
And there's no action requested, just receive and file.
Receive and file. Okay, moving on to item 7B. Review and approve contract with MKN for soil aquifer treatment and analysis.
Thank you. At your last meeting, you reviewed a draft contract with MKN to take the next step in analyzing the feasibility of your creek discharge project. Specifically, they had proposed $50,000 worth of services to analyze soil aquifer treatment, the ability of the natural soil column to remove some of the contaminants that would be important to get a groundwater recharge project permitted. And for those of you who maybe don't remember, creek discharge, to be done cost effectively, has to be done without reverse osmosis, which is being implemented in some of the other local communities. Those local communities all have ocean outfalls, places to put the brine that comes out of the reverse osmosis process. We don't have that here in Los Osos because we're inland, so we need to use other means of cleaning up the water. And so the key feasibility question is, and this will be going to the overall feasibility of the program, what can soil aquifer treatment do for us? So at the last meeting, we had some feedback from county operations staff that they weren't quite ready to jump in with both feet on this because it's going to require some physical samples out of the wastewater reclamation facility. It's going to require some operations coordination as those samples are obtained. And the county asked that we only allow an initial $5,000 for the consultant to make sure we flesh out all of the logistics. And those have been worked out. And county feels comfortable now that we can move forward on the remainder of the work proposed by MKN. So today, staff would like you to would propose that you approve the remaining contract amount and allow them to complete the balance of the work now that we've done that initial $5,000. We're already under contract with them. They're just waiting for authorization to proceed.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Bring it back to the board for a comment.
Just a question. So the soil treatment of this has to do with dealing just with the waste stream, the brine stream. I guess, have we looked at alternatives? And I should have consulted with our public works staff.
Sure. I think it's a good.
Could we toss that brine back into the wastewater plant, get it processed, diluted, and otherwise processed? It's part of the waste stream. I'm just thinking about how much are we actually talking about creek discharging here.
So it's brine discharge in an inland area is very challenging. You can't take out the dilute stream off the treated side and take the concentrate and put it back somewhere.
Put it back in
because even if you put it in a lined pond, then you ultimately, the best recovery you can get from reverse osmosis might be 70 or 80%. So it ends up being this huge volume of water to deal with.
But it was in the constituent. If we weren't doing creek discharge, all those same constituents would be going through the process and out to our disposal field.
They do, but that goes to the mass balance, right?
It's a concentration of them that's a concern.
It's a concentration that's a concern because if you send a slug of 4,000 milligram per liter solids up to Broderson. Number one, you're probably going to have problems in the drain field, but also that slug will then, result in impacts to that portion of the basin. So the regional board looks at it at the point of discharge.
Okay, so we've done the calculation. I mean, again, it all depends on how much of the recycled water stream you want to direct to the creek.
Yeah, even if it's just 100 acre feet, 50 to 100 acre feet.
It changes the concentrations enough to mess with it. Okay.
Yep. It'd have to be very, very small to not do that. Now, we're always looking for new technologies that can solidify that salt, literally crystallize it, and they are out there, but they are not ready for commercial or industrial scale. The day they are, it really changes the inland picture for recycled water.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. Good question.
So what I understand we would get for this $50,000 in this phase of this project, this study, would produce a digital outcome that either the DWR would approve based on these results, a creek discharge system, or they wouldn't, that these columnar tests would have results that they wouldn't allow.
I defer to
You're going to have a series of gates, and speaking to the tech guy, and this is one of them. And there will be future. I mean, there's $500,000 worth of total work, and we didn't want to. The committee didn't feel comfortable biting off that whole chunk.
Right.
But this is one critical piece.
And this critical piece, though, would produce this digital outcome.
Either
yes
go
or
forward or not. Now, there's other baseline monitoring and tracer studies and wells to drill. There's other things that have to happen before you say, we're a go. But if this one falls on its face, then we know we have to use a different approach.
Yep.
Have to use a different approach.
And we're not committing to further phases of this project at this point. We're just doing this, we're agreeing to $50,000 expenditure for this test that would
Correct.
produce that digital outcome.
Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly hoping for a positive outcome, but yes, I think that's true, is you've not committed. And I think that was the key, is take this in bite sizes and not commit more than you're ready to commit. Ultimately, if this comes out positive and it looks good, there will be a point at which we can no longer take baby steps. And you'll have to...
Off-ramps get further apart.
They get further apart. So, yeah. But this is a good step.
And would this put us in a better position for grant funding at that point? And
Every step you take, it will.
But we would still need a lead agency to lead that grant funding, because today we can't do that, correct?
Because you're not a public agency.
That's right.
But that can be coordinated through the county, IRWM, or...
County, district, we can do it. Have done it, can do it. Yeah. Those are, very good questions.
Okay. Open it up to public comment. Item 7B. Seeing none, bring it back. So, I need a motion to approve the amount not to exceed $50,000.
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Okay. Motion.
All right, Director Cody?
Yes, I approve.
Director Gibson?
Yes.
Chairperson Zimmer?
Yes.
Excellent. We'll let the consultant know, and then they are eager to proceed.
Okay, moving on to item 7C, discussion Cleith Harris geologist report on lower aquifer nitrate concentrations.
Thank you so much. And I do have a brief PowerPoint for folks to interact with here. So we might end up adjusting a light or two. Let me get this up and running. Just 4 slides. Might be on the back part of the room. Yeah. Great. Can you see that okay? Good. If you haven't had a chance to read this report and you're interested in Los Osos groundwater, I would encourage you to do so. It's a very interesting study. And it really goes to there's pros and cons with any public group, but I think this goes to the benefits of having a basin management committee, because in past years, the purveyors notice these trends in their wells, but they don't talk, so you never notice that it's a basin-wide trend. Now we're talking, and we notice a trend. And I'm going to show you a map here in a second. So the purpose of this study was twofold. One is to look at nitrate, and nitrate's a contaminant that's acute health risk. Certain sections of the population are very sensitive to nitrate. So it's not something that we can just watch creep up without being ready to take action. Nitrate's a very sensitive topic. So part of the study was nitrate, and the other part of the study was a seawater intrusion threat area that we historically haven't paid close attention to. So really 2 watch zones are addressed in the study. And so the first thing we like to talk about is nitrate. This is a draft report. We're not asking the committee to take action on it today. We're introducing it, and then we want substantive comments from folks as they have a chance to review it. Questions, comments, and it could take us a number of meetings to kind of get through the content here. So for those of you who have been thinking about Los Osos Basin water, you know that there's an upper aquifer and a lower aquifer. The upper aquifer historically has nitrate, and one of the sources, we believe, is septic systems. It's just a source. There could be other sources, ag or even equestrian activities and other things. But we have a contaminated upper aquifer with many areas that have nitrates above the drinking water limit. The lower aquifer historically does not have a lot of nitrate. We did notice sometimes when we would let a lower aquifer well sit for a long period of time, 6 months, a year, 2 years, turn it back on, and suddenly nitrates show up, and then they seem to decrease as we begin producing from the well again. And that was thought to be because of the original hole where the well was drilled. Nitrates are leaking from the upper end to the lower through that hole, even though there was attempt to seal it off. Those seals are not perfect. We call that borehole leakage. But we also see a trend which we cannot attribute to borehole leakage. We see a trend of sort of regional leakage through a big clay layer that separates our upper aquifer from our lower aquifer. Now we know from chemical studies and water studies that there is long-term leakage, which is a good thing, from our upper zone to our lower zone. That's part of how we recharge the lower zone, is from the Los Osos Creek and from leakage from upper to lower. But it was thought that significant volumes of nitrate were not necessarily going to be a problem there. At least that's what the purveyors often expected. So now we know through the models that have been done, some of the older studies that we're now reanalyzing and relooking at, and some of the recent data, that we certainly do have a trend in certain areas of the basin of increasing nitrates. And there's some of the wells there that are listed where that trend is evident. Now, it's not the kind of trend where next year we're going to have water that's unsafe to drink. Nothing like that. I mean, the report has some of the time horizons listed, but there would be 10 or 15, 20 years. But for a purveyor, it takes so long to implement projects. You want to be looking ahead to the point where you can not be so reactive. And so this study will help folks do that. I produced a little map, and no making fun of my map. So this basically, I put an arrow that was in proportion to its size is how much nitrate is increasing in these wells. And so we see that on the left-hand side, wells LA 8 and 9, one of those is an S&T well, the other one's a Golden State well with a pretty sizable arrow. We definitely see a defined trend, and it's not just from leakage through the borehole. We see a defined trend of nitrates increasing at those two wells on the western edge. This is just a technical statement, so if you're from Cabrillo Estates, do not take this as anything but a technical statement. One potential source of those nitrates is leach fields that are in Cabrillo Estates. I'm not saying that is the source, but as a technician, that would identify that that's one potential source because they're not connected to a wastewater project. In the middle part of the community, that effect seems to be more muted. You look at LA 10 and LA 15, the district's Library or Palisades well and Golden State's Resina well, the effect is much less. The rate of increase is much less. And then over on the eastern side of the community, where there's perhaps more creek influence, the district South Bay well, we see a very significant trend of nitrate increases, and that could be due in part to borehole leakage. So this map just gives you a general overview. And if you look at the little purple bar there towards the lower left hand, that's the Broderson effluent disposal site. Now, just so we have a few numbers in mind, there's two ways to report nitrate. It's very frustrating, but we're going to report it what we call as nitrogen. The maximum level in drinking water is 10, nice even number. Many of these wells might be at 2 or 3, so far below the drinking water limit. And again, it could take 10 to 20 years to reach that limit. The water that's going in at the Broderson percolation site is mandated. There's a regulatory mandated, but that it be no more than 7. So 70% of the drinking water limit. But the actual performance is much better. Currently, the plant is putting out less than 5. I've seen 2s and 3s coming out of the plant. And the operations staff can't guarantee that will always be that way, but since we're almost built out in terms of the number of connections, we can expect that nitrate coming from the wastewater plant is probably going to be around 5 milligrams per liter going forward under most conditions. When I say built out, sorry, I misspoke. I meant the connections of existing properties are almost complete, built out in terms of sewer connections. So one thing to note is that whatever effect of increasing nitrates have on our wells over the long term, steady state, we expect nitrate levels to reach a steady state similar to what the wastewater plant's putting out. So they could come up and they'll level off and they'll go down. And this is the point, going to Director Gibson's comment, where you wish I could throw a beautiful graph up there to tell you how long and what is the expected trend. But we don't have a model that does that. That predicts the time. All we can do with our current model is tell you what the steady state result will be over time. And so this is one area where a transient model, that $100,000 to $150,000 model, would be beneficial, is to be able to report what the time horizon will be for some of these changes to take place. So very interesting read if you haven't gone through it. It's quite technical, but if you do have interest, it's published on our website. And so that was lower aquifer nitrates, and certainly S&T is one party that is looking very carefully at this particular impact to the basin. And I'm sure the statistical understanding that S&T will have will be somewhat above what the rest of the community might have because of your primary production well is on that chart.
And also a GSW well, although the LA9 is not in production currently.
Your Cabrillo your Cabrillo well.
Right now, it's just temporarily out of production, so we're trying to put it back into production. We're optimistic. We've done some work and reports, analysis of what took place, and we're confident we're going to get it back shortly here, probably within the next month or so.
Great.
Where initially we thought we lost the well, so it was something that I think that's the information you had, that we were going to lose that well. Looks like we might be able to reduce the yield of the well, but still have it as part of our production.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And you'll see they're right next to each other. So really tapping that same area with very similar nitrate trends.
Yeah.
So there was excessive nitrates. Was that the issue or something else?
No, it was just a physical failure of the casing. Geology started moving in, and we had to pull the equipment. There are holes in the case. It's an older well, so we're just going to reduce the amount of pumping and
that's why Golden State does stainless steel on its casings now.
That's right, and that one is not.
Is not. Point proven.
Yeah.
So in the lower aquifer, the second part of the study focuses on chlorides. Now, if you look at the middle part of the map, it says LA10, LA15. That's a part of the basin where we've had some really good results over the last 5 years. We pushed chlorides back out to sea to some extent. We were very clear to tell the board and the community that this is a year-to-year issue. And because we know the seawater front sits right there on the edge of our community, it could come in at any time as a result of pumping patterns, climate patterns, recharge. All these things affect the seawater intrusion front. And so our numbers are very sensitive to the position of that front. As it comes in, the numbers go up very fast. We saw a secondary front in the battle here with seawater intrusion, and that was at our Pasadena monitoring well that's labeled there as LA11, right there on the coast. All of our production wells, they're in the lower aquifer, but they're in a shallower part of the lower aquifer called Zone D. Zone E is the deepest part of the lower aquifer. And because of the density of seawater, which is denser than fresh water, the deeper the well is, the more it has a propensity for seawater to come in. And we have been noticing a trend at that LA11. And We're also noticing somewhat of a trend at LA 12 there, the district's Zone D 8th Street well, which we rely on very substantially with the district. So we had a chance to analyze these effects, report on them, and it was interesting. Some of the conclusions in the study were that, number one, some of the results are expected and are primarily combated through the Broderson percolation site building a mound of water under the ground, a subsurface mound, that will serve to push more water into the lower aquifer. But again, to be able to tell you how long it will take for that mound to develop, we're already measuring that mound. We can see it in just downstream of Broderson. It's beginning to build up, but it'd be great to have a model to tell you how that's going to change over time and how that water is going to move from upper through to lower to help combat seawater intrusion in the Baywood area here. So this is another watch zone that the committee will be carefully watching into the future. There's no imminent threat to our 8th Street well. Chlorides remain low at that well, but it certainly is an area that we will be watching. We gave you, as part of your staff report on this item, and folks can download it, the latest results from the monitoring of lower aquifer water quality, including the recently drilled Lupin monitoring well. And we can report that Zone D chlorides at the Lupin well were about 300. So similar to some of the chlorides that we've seen in the past at the Rosina well, and that's on the second page of your staff note. And so you'll see all the fall monitoring results. We're going to come back with a lot more analysis of those recently released results, but we wanted to get the raw data into the community's hands, and so that's posted on the website. And then analysis will be forthcoming in future meetings as we dive into trends that we see with that data, including the chloride metric. So takeaways from the report. Oh, and here you can see the trend lines for increasing chloride. You'll see there in the lower part of the map the district's 8th Street lower aquifer well slowly creeping up with a slow trend that was noticed back in the 80s and early 90s. So we're nowhere near to a level where it'd be a concern for using that well. We're still at 100 milligrams per liter chloride, which is still very good water, but it is a slow trend that we're keeping an eye on. A much steeper trend is evident in that deep zone, which we don't pump from today at LA 11, and that's a trend we're keeping a very close eye on going forward. A couple of takeaways from the study, a few points on nitrate. Lower aquifer wells are impacted by increasing nitrates, and they're coming not just from borehole contamination, but through regional leakage. That those nitrate concentrations are expected to increase and level off and then to finally reach some sort of steady state at 5 milligrams per liter, which is exactly what the wastewater plant is putting out. And that in the interim, as we watch this trend, we might reach a point where blending or treatment may be necessary for a period of time. Obviously not at steady state because it will be half the maximum level, but treatment may be needed in the interim as you see those levels come up in the basin. Be prepared for nitrate removal ultimately at the S&T well and the District South Bay well. And then one of the technical requests from our geologists is that perhaps we get some more of the automated monitoring to track the formation of that groundwater mound. We have one instrument that's tracking it and is very helpful, showing the mound. But to show its growth over time, we may want to consider instrumenting a few additional wells to be able to get the edges of that mound further defined. And then consider initiating, certainly from the perspective of siting and funding Program B. Not that you have to roll it out next year, but consistent with our previous discussions, we do want to look at how that program will be funded, where those facilities will go, how we'll deliver those projects. And that concludes my presentation of a pretty extensive memo. I've certainly hit the highlights, but not everything. Be happy to answer questions. Again, this is an open discussion, no action recommended today. And I'll flip back to the map because that seems to be the most helpful.
Thank you, Rob. I'll bring it back to the board for...
Yeah, a couple questions, and we don't need to belabor this given more analysis, but borehole leakage was noted by our staff as called out in that tech memo in terms of assessing lower aquifer nitrate. We know the upper aquifer has plenty of nitrates in it. Can that explain a goodly chunk of what we're seeing here?
No, it's in fact that the study does go on to try to
tease that
speciate that out.
Yeah.
And we believe, based on some of the behavior of the nitrates, that it's regional leakage, not just borehole leakage.
Well, okay, so to do with the fundamental structure of the basin that we're getting contaminations. So that should, again, diminish in time as the nitrates in the upper aquifer diminish with the treatment. Okay. I guess the other observations, the tech memo really didn't talk about the new monitoring well. This was commissioned ahead of that. You have the new data in the report.
Right. This was drafted and completed, but that data is hot off the press.
Okay. So there are just two lines in there that suggest the nature of the water in Zone D and Zone E is drastically different.
Right.
And the chlorides in particular are much less than 300. They're in the 136 is what's listed here. But the chlorides in the lower aquifer, 1,400, which is completely out of bounds with any other observation we've found. And do we have any thoughts about that?
Now, remember, as you move to the west, we have in the deepest parts of the basin some chloride numbers that are in the thousands.
Right.
And you kind of have to hunt for it on the...
But if I'm guessing where the new lupin, which you're calling LA 40 and 41, depending, that's just west of LA 12, right? Basically, or a little bit south of that.
It is
sort of halfway between LA 10 and 12
yes.
on a line there, something like that.
No, it's more due north of LA 10.
Okay.
If I can hit it with my cursor.
Right.
It's in this region right on Lupin there.
Okay.
Kind of the north.
And again, I don't need to belabor that. It just seemed like there are some seriously, to my eye, outlying values that are popping up here, and wondered about how that gets wrapped into the analysis.
Right. And again, in chloride, 136. Thank you. I misstated that. I appreciate that. The total hardness was 312, but the chloride was 136. So Zone D, no surprises there at Lupin. Zone E, that high value, we definitely see some active intrusion there. Again, we don't produce from that zone in that area. So it's a concern because as you pump above it, even though there's a clay separating it, you could have an inducement of flow.
Okay. So again, transient model would allow us to figure out what happens as we change trend.
Yes, it would.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I have some observations that I'd just like to mention from a fairly close reading of this document and a discussion with Spencer Harris. That I found it interesting that in the report that part of the model, there are two methods for nitrate to get into the lower aquifer, like we've discussed before. One of them is regional aquitard leakage, where there's a general leakage through the clay layer separating the upper aquifer from the lower aquifers, and wellbore leakage, which is more local. In general, higher production, pulling harder on a lower aquifer well, encourages a greater regional aquitard leakage and higher nitrate concentrations resulting from higher production rates in that well. So that's a general trend that's mentioned in this document. The wellbore leakage, you tend to see that, according to Spencer's report, when a well is rested for a relatively long time and then put back into harder production, you would see a spike, a short spike in nitrate concentrations. And S&T has observed both of these things. So it's nice to have that written down and our observations confirmed by this report. Another thing that is interesting that from a reading of this report is that the two public wells, LA8 and LA9, which are just directly downhill from the Cabrillo Estates sewage plume of still what the remaining high-density septic systems, are seeing some of the highest rates of increase in nitrate, which is what you might expect. These are two lower aquifer wells. Spencer also says that the mounding of recycled water in the Broderson field will tend to create a forcing function, which would block any flow of that sewage plume from Cabrillo Estates from going easterly and force it down the gradient downhill toward these wells. Now, I've mentioned the well LA8 and LA9, which are public water wells, one S&T and one Golden State Water, but there are also a number of private wells in that area also that I believe they're not under measurement, that they're not part of what Spencer measures for the Basin Management Committee, but I think S&T may try to appropriate some funding to maybe do some testing over there ourselves. I just wanted to, I think that that's all. I just wanted to make sure that those are highlighted in case anybody missed that in these reports.
Excellent.
So, Cody, the other wells that you mentioned, are they upper aquifer wells, though? Because I think some of those wells that I'm aware of are more of the upper aquifer, not the lower aquifer wells. Rob, maybe you know.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, Spencer wasn't sure when I've asked him that in the past. So that is an interesting question, and certainly we want to get some well reports from that in addition to test results. But if they're upper aquifer wells, we would assume that they're also getting some of this resulting plume from the Cabrillo Estates coming down that steep gradient through the fine sands.
Okay. We'll open it up to public comment.
Good. Thank you.
Lindy Owen again. I go back to remembering back in 2005 some of the nitrate levels that were in that same under Cabrillo Estate and S&T and the golf course, and close to the largest horse boarding area in the community. And they were, I think if you added them up, if you took them out of the equation, we wouldn't even have had to have a sewer because of the nitrates. So it isn't unusual that this continues because Cabrillo Estates did not hook up to the sewer. The golf course continues putting major amounts of fertilizer to have a nice green golf course, and the horses continue doing their thing up there. So I find it's really interesting that things are trending towards the same situation. So whether they're coming from the aquitard into the lower, and then I think the pressure zones, that's a pretty interesting idea that Broderson's pushing it even harder to go down and maybe into the lower aquifer. So I really do think it should have been discussed long ago that that's where most of our nitrates in the community seem to be coming from. And now that the sewer is offline, that's obvious. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Patrick McGibney, and I'm here on behalf of the Los Osos Sustainability Group and the Sierra Club, and I'll try to go through this as quickly as possible. We haven't been to the meetings for a few years, but after hearing that the basin has miraculously recovered from 30 years of severe seawater intrusion in 3 years and will now support all the housing needs the county has brought us back. Unfortunately, when we looked at the last few annual reports of monitoring, we came to much different conclusions than the reports and Supervisor Gibson. The findings that seawater intrusion reversed in the last 2 or 3 years are based on too little findings and too little data to reliably show that the retreat of seawater intrusion. The reports, in fact, acknowledge that the data is unreliable due to the variabilities and contamination. The reports also state that the wells used to monitor seawater intrusion were chosen intentionally to show program benefits. In other words, the data has a confirmation bias. We recently submitted our comments to the Los Osos Community Plan EIR, which I've included in the handouts I just gave you. The community plan would allow more development to occur as basin plan programs are implemented if the county sees signs that the programs are effective. The seawater intrusion report confirms several expressed concerns that we have given you in the past. Number one is that the seawater intrusion will continue to move in unless you maximize all basin plan programs as soon as possible due to very low water levels throughout the basin and because Broderson recharge will have delayed and uncertain effects on seawater intrusion. 2, seawater intrusion can intrude at any point along the bay with low water levels. And 3, many more monitoring wells are needed to track seawater intrusion in all 3 main aquifers. In fact, you don't know the extent of seawater intrusion in Zone E, even with the report. Seawater intrusion may be under 8th Street well, or it may be nearing the South Bay well. Seawater intrusion reports also confirms that modeling uncertainties are too great to say that implementing basin plan programs will raise basin yields or reverse seawater intrusion. Think about the report's implications for a moment. It says seawater intrusion will continue in the deep aquifer despite the yield metrics being below the target of 80% unless the groundwater mound under Broderson leach field is fully formed in the upper aquifer and moves enough water into the lower aquifer to raise water levels and push back seawater intrusion. The ability of the leach fields to move water to the lower aquifer will not be known for at least 7 years or so, and the process, if it is effective, will not be fully understood or effective for 33 years. It also says seawater intrusion in Zone E can also upcone into Zone D, knocking out Zone D wells. Here are a few realities that this report brings to light. Number 1, seawater intrusion is progressing despite the chloride metric showing the opposite for 2 years. 2, 80% yield metric targets do not reverse seawater intrusion in the foreseeable future, if at all, and allows permanent loss of the basin in Zone E. 3, the sustainable yield is not really sustainable because it allows seawater intrusion to shut down Zone D wells. And 4, Infrastructure Program B and all basin programs except creek discharge will likely be needed in an attempt to stop advancing seawater intrusion into Zone E to achieve the first and second immediate goals of the basin plan, to stop and reverse seawater intrusion and to provide sustainable water supplies for the current development. Furthermore, these realities mean that a lot more data, hard data, and a lot more seawater intrusion monitoring sites are needed before you can say conclusively that the basin is sustainable for the current or future populations. Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you for the written materials as well.
Yeah.
Real quick question for the last speaker. If you have a electronic version of these, I would take them as well. Yeah.
If you could forward them to committee members also.
For the minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Edwards. And as I understand it, this tech memo is a work in progress.
Yes.
And so it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. A couple quick comments. I think there's either an absence or not a full discussion of how the creek discharge project might fold into and dovetail with this analysis. And one of the conclusions I have to again take issue with, as I discussed before, is this idea that we need to initiate Program B. We've already initiated it. The question is, do we expand it? And I think it's premature to do that for a number of reasons, which I already mentioned. Mostly is operation and maintenance cost. And then lastly, just as a sidebar, if we implemented all basin plan projects, we'd need about $35 million. I don't think we have that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other public comment, I'll bring it back to the board. Rob, you want to comment on?
I think there were some very good statements and great input and good written materials to review. I didn't hear anything that wanted a specific response there, but certainly as this memo comes back in future meetings, we can interact with some of those issues that were raised. Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
Cody? Is there a method that when someone's submitting large technical information like this, that could be presented prior to the meeting and the board could have this in their hands?
Certainly depends on the speaker. If they have it ready beforehand and they desire to do that and they provide it to staff, we will get that out to the board as soon as we have it. So this one we'll publish with the minutes so folks have a chance to review it in more detail because we didn't have this before. So.
To the extent I understand the context of this, these are comments that were submitted to the EIR on the area plan, so they'll be responded to in the EIR.
Got it. Thank you. And we thought it was just for us. Okay. Very good.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 7D, discussion of 2020 priorities and budget.
Thank you. I appreciate the patience of the audience working through all these important issues. So like we did last year, in the early years we brought you a budget in January, but last year we started bringing you an early preview. So in particular, your staff can analyze what we're suggesting so that when we come back in January, we don't miss the mark too substantially. So we've provided you sort of a draft budget of some of the activities that at least staff would think would be important next year. And I'll just walk through those briefly. Many of those are the same that you've been doing for a number of years. Certainly your administrative cost is something that we're looking to fund in 2020. That's the preparation of your annual reports, the holding of these meetings, and we average about one meeting every 2 months. The renting of the facility and the videotaping of the meetings. So those are all normal and customary costs. We have adjusted the administrative budget up to account for the proposal that you've reviewed with WSC for Mr. Heimel's time. So that's going to be reflected in the budget that we bring to you in January. And then we'd like to continue to look at stepwise adaptive management budgeting. That small budget, which has been $10,000 to $15,000, I think has yielded some of the really good technical work, just like the memo you just reviewed. And so one of the things we'd like to do next year is, now that we have a new monitoring well at Cuesta by the Sea, how do we assimilate our understanding from what we've got out of that monitoring event? The new test well we're drilling at Los Osos Middle School, we're getting new data points in, and we'd like to look at adaptive management discussion for those new data points. Certainly your recycled water planning grant that you discussed earlier today, we've thrown a small budget to go after that grant, $5,000, and we think it's a pretty small cost to pay to be able to pursue what could be $150,000 if we can come up with the match through our other activities. Since you're now just getting started on that creek recharge and replenishment study, we want to make sure that you're ready to spend those dollars next year, because you've only spent about 5 of it. And so we've kind of rolled that over into next year's budget. And same with the stormwater and perch water recovery. We have a proposal now, and we want to be prepared to spend that $15,000. We did have a new item this year that we're suggesting. We called it funding and organizational studies. And that's going to be focused primarily on 2 matters. One is Program B, and the form of that will bring back more details, but it could be a study that's focused on what would the fair share cost of that Program B project be for current development versus future development, and if there is going to be development, to what extent would a connection fee type program be able to fund that over time as that project phases in. We've got some concepts that we put together on that. And then organizationally, you've heard some public testimony, and you've talked about the JPA formation. So continuing to put flesh on that, make that clear, what that approach would look like, what benefits and what costs would come along with that. So instead of just having a more minor effort at the staff level here in administration, we've suggested a $40,000 funding allocation spread throughout the year to be able to pursue those more detailed efforts to bring that to a documented result and conclusion. And so those are some of the highlights in this budget. Again, no action today, but we can have a discussion, and then we'd love for you to take the next 3-4 weeks through the holidays. I know you have nothing else to do, so review staff's thoughts and get us some feedback in preparation for the January meeting, hopefully by that first week in January, and we'll reflect those in your formal budget discussions in January. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Rob. Bring it back to the board.
This looks good to us at S&T. We're still spending less money than we thought that this was going to cost at S&T, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I like the idea of the funding and organizational studies part of the budget, and of course we've already approved the increase to $70,000 for the administration budget.
So S&T's ready to spend some more money? That will help the county out in a big way, I think.
That's kind of what I heard too.
In a proportionate.
Did I take that out of context?
When S&T spends more money, everybody else spends more money proportionally.
Yeah, the ongoing administrative costs, that fall to the county, I think are going to be the topic of some further discussion. We've been working on this for a long time. Our county staff, at least 2 of whom we see sitting here today, and sometimes there are more, put in a lot of in-kind work, and I think an accurate accounting of that is reasonable. And but it also speaks again to my thoughts about the JPA. I mean, yes, I understand a JPA imposes a certain amount of overhead. At the same time, this committee is charged. We don't have a sunset date on this committee. We are at this in perpetuity. So we need to see what a stable funding source looks like. And the county not being a water purveyor, though representing water users within this basin, is in a little different situation than the other 3 members of this committee. And so we're interested. I'm interested in particular in the long term, the long view on this. We have projects that we need to do. That's going to be clear. We have some adjustment of how we reconcile payments by various residents of the basin to benefits that are accrued to various members of the basin, and we have a few more than a few technical things that are going to come up over the course of time. So I too am comfortable with this as an outline. I'll be talking with our staff, and I think we could usefully convene staff to staff conversations before we get back to the table here in January so that we have a clear sense of how we set ourselves on a permanent path to success here. So,
thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree too. Having this staff-to-staff work on this budget and communicate how we move forward and be ready to go in January seems like a good approach. I just, as we look for funding sources, we hear from some of the public and their willingness to participate, and maybe there's a way we could tie that into a potential funding source. So open to listening to that also. If we start moving towards a JPA, there might be other opportunities for funding.
I want to make a comment about the staff-to-staff meetings that in the past, S&T has not been included in these staff-to-staff meetings, and I'd like to see that change. Sure. And if it's a problem that I sit on the S&T Board of Directors, that can be cured. I don't need to do that if that's a problem. Okay. Or other staff. We can hire other staff to do that, but we want to participate.
Sure. Leave it to technical staff and council to figure out the most efficient way forward. I think that's absolutely appropriate.
If there's somebody who doesn't sit on this board was the primary.
That can be fixed too. Yeah, okay. we can find solutions to that, but S&T needs to be represented in these staff meetings. Sure.
Designate someone for us, and we'll definitely invite them to the next discussion. Great.
Okay,
yeah, more Garfinkel time. Sorry.
Open item 7D to public comment.
Bill Garfinkel, Monarch Lane. I would just like to encourage, although 3 of the 4 of you belong to organizations that are members of the Earworm. Unfortunately, Golden State is not eligible for that. But that we take a more aggressive role in Earworm, showing up at meetings and in their committees. Those who are most successful for off-the-wall projects, other than really major, come from organizations that are small. We're actually, the Basin Management Committee is a large organization, if you look at it. And we don't participate nearly to the extent that we should be on the Earworm, which is a funding program. So I would encourage, I like the idea of raising the amount of money and somehow get all of you to participate for going for those funds. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lindy Owen, just a couple of questions. I am still have not gotten an answer. When we separated, we have the 2 sub-basins, the Warden Lake area and the one that's towards eastern side. They were taken out of our basin management. And who pays for those? Is the county paying those? I've asked Mr. Gibson, and maybe we could get an answer to that. I'm not sure why any basin would go being covered by the county when we could have covered it and they could have had a lesser participation share because of the fact that we aren't totally connected. The other point I wanted to make, and I wonder if there's a chance to look at that, and this again is a responsibility of the county, the quantity monitoring of all private wells. As we look at the cannabis and the hemp and the vineyards that are starting to come in, how are you going to tell us how much water disappears from them? I'm not real comfortable with airplanes flying over and guesstimating, and I really don't see where we are at a point in California where this is basically important information, and it kind of throws our whole basin management off by not having that data and not having it set up so that private wells, and whether we pay for it, I don't care. I just think it's important data, and it needs to be collected on an annual basis just to know how much has been taken out from their private well, because there are private wells that are dead never going to be used, and there's others that are going to be increased hugely. And until we get a monitoring system in for those, it's great that we're doing the new ones, but I think we've got 500 that are flying by with no data being entered into our calculations. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marcy Begleiter, a homeowner in Cuesta by the Sea. I want to first of all thank you very much for having this kind of open, very informative meeting on a regular basis. As a relatively new resident, I'm interested in these issues and also hope to be a resident for a very long time and an active one. My question has to do with input and oversight from this committee into the Los Osos development plan or community plan, which is clearly also a plan that focuses quite a lot on development. My question has to do with, in my reading of that plan, the level of development which is being suggested on the high end is around 30% increase in housing units over the period of 15 years. So that comes to somewhere close to double that of California in terms of what we've historically seen. Clearly, there are mitigating issues having to do with that development and the water resources. So my question has to do with how does this committee have input and also oversight with teeth? Right? Not just, we're going to give you some feedback, but this max cap seems quite high in terms of, the kind of quiet community that we have. When I kind of looked at that, I thought, well, what is it going to look like and feel like to have 10 new homes completed every single month for 180 months, which is kind of how it breaks down. And how does that impact if we take a look at, what you've presented today, the saltwater intrusion? Maybe it's been ameliorated a little bit, but it's still an issue. And, there are wells being drilled, but we have rising seas. How can you explain to us how this committee will be a balancing act on the kind of, I'm not no development person. I'm happy to see development happen. But when I look at that plan, I wonder if a 30% rise in population over 15 years, how is that supported by our resources?
I'll make a brief comment at the end.
Thanks, Marcy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, seeing no other comment, we'll bring it back to the board.
On that, Ms. Begler, I'm happy to talk to you at length about this, but fundamentally the approval of the Los Osos Community Plan update is going to depend on demonstrating a sustainable supply of water to service the build-out that the plan envisions. That's a fundamental tenet of the planning regulation that we put in place there and will be demanded of us by the Coastal Commission, who has to eventually certify this plan. And so this committee in its basin management plan has shown what it takes to develop the water resource here to serve roughly the build-out that's contemplated, going from about 15,000 to roughly 19,000 total population within Los Osos, and we can walk you through how that looks. The other aspect of both our water resource management and very likely the implementation of the community plan is going to be what's called adaptive management, which means that the path from current population to whatever the build-out population might be is going to be measured over time and is going to be demanded that we demonstrate over the long term the adequacy of the resources to support that. So we'll have a growth rate. Getting those 4,000 residents into Los Osos within 15 years, I think, and I'm not sure where that reference showed up, I would think it would take much longer than that under most reasonable growth scenarios to make that trend. And in that time, this committee continues to monitor the status of the of the resource, and that's all going to be wrapped into the community plan. We can talk about that.
Can I respond?
Well, let me take it offline with you if I could, and we can do that.
And I did want to hit on Lindy's comment as well, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Yep, thank you, Rob.
Lindy had asked about the fringe area outside the basin, and the way I think, and county staff can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the county made the investment to define that fringe to apply for its separate management under DWR, and when it ultimately was determined that that was a low priority,
very low priority, you didn't then have the burden to prepare the big groundwater sustainability plan that you're having to do for some of the other fringes throughout the county. So at that point, the expense sort of fell off, and now that area is self-managing. Did I get that right? Could say briefly, we have GSAs for both the little parts that of the main basin that are outside of the adjudicated area, and those are very low priority, and again don't require much effort. And then the whole eastern part of the basin is its own sub-basin. The county is the GSA for that. Again, a very low priority basin, not requiring any effort at this point. So it's you're correct in your analysis.
Okay, so I got that right. Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to item 8, public comment on items not appearing on the agenda.
I got to leave, so I just wanted to comment that fringe basin that is to the east of us that's where all the cannabis farms are going. So I would rather see some vegetables have priority over this whole new industry that has other areas to be. It doesn't need to be taking up our view shed or that water basin, which you don't know how much water it has in it because it's not being monitored. The build out, again, when you go back to section C 6.2, project alternatives out of the community plan, the county appends that we should be going for alternative 4, which means growth with mitigation. So I go back and in my comments, I said that alternative 3, which is reduced development based on water availability, that's a true basin management. The county is pushing to go to alternative 4, which would mean that this paper water that is being created in this process, which we all want to see it succeed, but it's not a guarantee. And that has been the way that this county likes to build, is based on we probably have enough water, let's go ahead and do it. And I support what her comments were, that we don't need to be speeding through. Currently, we're watching growth go on outside the prohibition zone. We're being hindered. And as far as putting in the alternative, or the, what are they called, the small houses onto properties, it's more than a bedroom. It's a whole person using an entire kitchen and an entire bathroom. So it's not quite the same as adding a bedroom on. And then the recycled water, I just want to again throw it out. It costs energy to move water. In fact, I think 50% of the energy in California is to move liquids and sewage. Broderson is the furthest pumping point in this whole process. So again, if we want to start seeing that recycled water go closer, we need to start up negotiations. And if the quality of the water isn't there, maybe, as Steve Best said, we could improve on it. And I'd like to have that added in so that the cemetery could use that water, so that the hemp farmer could use that water, so that that water is being used close to where it's being treated and released, instead of having to be pumped the furthest distance that you could possibly pump it up to Broderson for a model that we don't even know how well it's going to work in the end. Could be going into the seawater and treated section. So anyway, that's my comments. Thank you.
Patrick McGibney. After 40 years of overdraft and 30 years of severe seawater intrusion, the only way anyone can be reasonably sure that the basin will support more development is with much more empirical data. Well samples over time, more monitoring wells than you currently use, showing that seawater intrusion is reversed, water levels are high enough to keep it reversed, and that the water margin of safety is there, and that there's enough additional water in storage safely above sea level to sustainably support more development. We are a long ways from that right now, as shown by the seawater intrusion report on the agenda today. The report confirms seawater intrusion is advancing in Zone E, which means the first immediate goal of the basin plan to stop and to the extent possible reverse seawater intrusion has not been achieved, nor the goal for the second goal is to provide sustainable water supplies for current and future development. A lot more hard data from a lot more seawater intrusion monitoring sites are needed before anyone can say conclusively that the basin is sustainable for the current or future populations. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Barry Brannon, Los Osos, and Morro Bay. About a year ago, I was fortunate enough to meet Ron Munns at an event put on by the Farm Bureau. And the subject of our meeting was stormwater recapture in the Warden Basin. And we had a lengthy conversation about that. I hope Mr. Munns remembers that, because I think at our meeting we proposed a place that will maybe solve some of the balance. Stormwater is really the answer. And I know if you've driven during the rainy period in January down Cherry Road, you'll notice that they've had to realign the road because of the stormwater that runs out and wipes out the road. There's a lot of ways to capture stormwater. Mr. Bunz is aware of it, and I'm excited to see him join this group. Thank you.
Bill Garfinkel, Monarch Lane. Okay. I'd just like to use this occasion to thank Rob Miller for all he's done from the time I first met him on the TAC many years ago, and we worked together on the Basin Plan and other things. And I think the effort that he's brought to this community and his ability to monitor our forming of the Basin Management Committee is really a wonderful, wonderful job. So thank you so much, Rob. This is your last meeting.
Okay, seeing no other comment, I'll bring it back to Rob.
Happy as can be, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Are those your last words?
It's been an amazing process, and just so refreshing to see a community that can come together over the period of years, talk about one of the most divisive issues that you can talk about, and do it like they did today, like they've done it for the 4 years that we've been doing this. A good discussion, respectful people on both sides, good information. And I think Los Osos has great days ahead. And I'll certainly be around, though, in the same role that you are right now as a member of the public. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Rob.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. I haven't even used this.
Let me ask you. Let me add my personal thanks, and on behalf of county staff, it's always a pleasure working with you, sir. Your breadth of knowledge and your calm and constructive demeanor have meant a whole lot to this community. And I'm going to miss you in your formal role, but as I indicated offline, we know where to find you, and expect your continued participation in one way or another, and that's a really good thing. So congratulations on 4 years of outstanding accomplishment.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that, Rob, and I appreciate all your help and support in teaching me about the basin over the years. And I first came to Los Osos, and just a wealth of knowledge that I hope you do continue to participate, because Los Osos definitely benefits from you being here and being active in the community. So thank you.
Yeah, the common and respectful conduct at this meeting is largely from your the way that you conduct the meetings. And I really appreciate that. And also, just in case anybody misunderstands, Rob's not leaving Los Osos. He's going to continue to live in Los Osos. So We'll see him at the grocery store. We'll see him at these meetings.
Actually, I do own a property in Los Osos. My mom's here, but we're in SLO now.
Oh, okay.
All right. Yeah. And also welcome Dan. Well, Dan will be at our next meeting. So welcome aboard. All right. With that, I'll call the meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.